The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Cascade shooting range as Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez fumbled with a box of ammunition, sending brass casings scattering across the concrete like metallic raindrops. The sound echoed through the crisp Montana air, drawing snickers from a group of fresh recruits who'd been watching her struggle with what should have been a simple equipment check. "There goes Butterfingers again," one of them muttered, loud enough for Rodriguez to hear, but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. "Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The nickname had stuck since her arrival at Fort Cascade 6 months ago, earned through a series of seemingly clumsy incidents that had made her the unofficial laughingstock of Delta Company's training facility. What none of them knew was that, in exactly 43 days, this same woman they mocked would take a shot that would alter the course of history itself. A shot so precise, so impossible, that military strategists would study it for decades. A shot that would save thousands of lives and bring end to a conflict that had consumed the world's attention for 3 brutal years. But that revelation lay buried beneath weeks of misconceptions, hidden behind the facade of a quartermaster who couldn't seem to handle basic equipment without dropping it. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are hidden in the most ordinary places, and sometimes the hands that shake while organizing supplies are the steadiest when it matters most. The humidity clung to everything at Fort Cascade that September morning, making uniforms stick uncomfortably to skin and causing even the most seasoned soldiers to move with deliberate slowness. Private Marcus Chen stepped off the transport bus with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a challenge he couldn't master through sheer determination and natural talent. His dress uniform remained crisp despite the Montana heat, and his posture spoke of someone accustomed to being the best in any room he entered. Chen had graduated at the top of his class from basic training, earning expert marksman qualifications, with scores that had impressed even the most demanding instructors. His service record was spotless, his test scores exceptional, and his confidence in his own abilities was absolute. At 22, he possessed the kind of natural shooting ability that made other recruits envious and instructors optimistic about his potential. Fort Cascade represented the next step in his military career, a specialized training facility where the Army's most promising marksmen came to refine their skills before deployment to active combat zones. Chen had specifically requested assignment here, knowing that graduates from Cascade's advanced program were fast-tracked for elite units and special operations consideration. He saw it as another stepping stone toward the recognition and advancement he felt he deserved. The first thing Chen noticed as he made his way toward the administrative building was the shooting range, where the sharp crack of rifle fire created a steady rhythm that would become the soundtrack to his time at Cascade. Multiple ranges accommodated different training scenarios, from basic marksmanship to advanced long-distance precision shooting. The facility was impressive, equipped with the latest technology and staffed by instructors whose reputations preceded them throughout the military. Chen's confidence only grew as he observed the other personnel moving around the base. Most appeared to be standard military personnel, competent but unremarkable. He quickly assessed his competition among the other new arrivals, noting their nervous energy and obvious inexperience. In his mind, he was already positioning himself as the natural leader of this group, the one who would set the standard for excellence. The administrative processing took most of the morning, during which Chen learned about Cascade's reputation for producing some of the military's finest marksmen. The facility had been operational for over 2 decades, and its graduates had distinguished themselves in conflicts around the world. Chen absorbed this information with satisfaction, seeing it as confirmation that he belonged among the elite. It was during the lunch break that Chen first encountered Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez in what would become a defining moment of misunderstanding. The mess hall was bustling with activity as personnel from various units grabbed quick meals between training sessions. Chen had just collected his tray when he heard a crash from the serving area, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal hitting the floor. Rodriguez was bent over, collecting scattered utensils that had apparently spilled from an overloaded tray she'd been carrying. Her movements seemed awkward, almost nervous, as she hurriedly gathered the fallen items while other personnel stepped around her, with expressions ranging from mild annoyance to barely concealed amusement. Chen watched with growing incredulity as she struggled to balance everything she was trying to carry. "Smooth move, Butterfingers," called out Corporal David Walsh from across the serving line, his comment drawing chuckles from nearby soldiers. Rodriguez simply nodded acknowledgement and continued cleaning up her mess without any visible reaction to the mocking tone. Chen noticed how she kept her eyes down, seemingly embarrassed by the attention her clumsiness had attracted. This was Chen's first introduction to the woman who would fundamentally change his understanding of military service, though he had no way of knowing it at the time. All he saw was a sergeant who appeared incapable of handling basic tasks without creating chaos. The contrast between his own precision and her apparent clumsiness was so stark that he immediately dismissed her as someone who'd probably been promoted through time and service rather than demonstrated competence. After finishing his meal, Chen made his way to the equipment depot for his initial gear assignment. The building was organized with military precision, shelves lined with weapons, optics, and specialized equipment that represented the cutting edge of military technology. Chen was impressed by the quality and variety of equipment available, seeing it as another confirmation that Cascade was indeed a premier facility. Rodriguez was working behind the equipment counter when Chen approached, consulting a clipboard with the same methodical attention she'd apparently brought to her mess hall disaster. She looked up as he presented his assignment papers, and Chen noticed that her eyes held an intelligence that seemed inconsistent with the klutzy behavior he'd witnessed earlier. Still, first impressions were powerful, and Chen had already categorized her as someone of limited competence. "Private Chen," she said, reading from his paperwork. "Advanced Marksmanship Program. You'll need the standard issue plus specialized optics package." Her voice was steady and professional, but Chen detected what he interpreted as uncertainty in her manner. Rodriguez moved through the depot with surprising efficiency, gathering the various items Chen would need for his training, but she moved carefully as if afraid of making another mistake. Chen watched as she assembled his equipment package, noting how she double-checked each item against her list. To him, this appeared to be the behavior of someone who'd made enough mistakes to know she needed extra caution. He didn't recognize it as the thoroughness of someone who understood that attention to detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Everything looks good," Rodriguez said, sliding the equipment across the counter. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Your training schedule starts tomorrow at 0600. Range assignments are posted outside the barracks." As Chen signed for his equipment, Rodriguez accidentally knocked over a small container of cleaning supplies, sending the contents rolling across the floor behind the counter. "Sorry," she said, quickly moving to collect the scattered items. "Happens more often than I'd like." Chen noticed how several other soldiers who'd witnessed the incident exchanged knowing looks, and he realized that Rodriguez's reputation for clumsiness was well established among the base personnel. He filed this information away as confirmation of his initial assessment. Walking to his assigned barracks with his new equipment, Chen felt satisfied with his rapid evaluation of the base's personnel structure. He'd quickly identified the competent individuals who could help advance his career, and those who, like Rodriguez, appeared to be marking time in positions that exceeded their capabilities. Chen prided himself on his ability to read people quickly and accurately, a skill he believed would serve him well in his military career. His barracks assignment put him in a room with 3 other marksman candidates, all of whom had similar backgrounds of exceptional performance in their previous assignments. Corporal Sarah Kim had been the top graduate from her military police training program, while Private Alex Rivera had distinguished himself as a reconnaissance specialist before requesting advanced marksmanship training. The fourth member of their group, Private Jake Morrison, had earned his place through consistent excellence in competitive shooting during his civilian life before enlisting. Chen quickly established himself as the informal leader of this group, sharing his observations about the base personnel and offering his assessments of who would be worth cultivating relationships with during their training. His confidence was infectious, and his new roommates found themselves deferring to his apparent expertise in navigating military hierarchies. "The equipment sergeant seems nice enough," Kim mentioned as she organized her gear. Sergeant Rodriguez was very thorough when she issued my equipment. Chen smiled knowingly, having expected someone might defend Rodriguez out of misplaced sympathy. "She's thorough because she has to be," Chen explained with the patient tone of someone educating the less observant. "People who make mistakes learn to double-check everything. I watched her drop equipment twice in the first hour I was here. She's probably had enough incidents that extra caution is her only way to avoid more serious problems." Rivera nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. I've known people like that. Good intentions, but they probably shouldn't be handling critical equipment." Chen was pleased to see his assessment being accepted so readily, confirming his belief in his own perceptiveness. Morrison, who had been listening while unpacking his civilian shooting trophies, looked up with interest. "What about the instructors? Any read on them yet?" Chen had observed several of the training staff during his initial tour, and he was confident in his ability to categorize them as well. "Mixed bag," Chen replied. "Some look like they know their stuff. Others probably got instructor positions because they couldn't cut it in operational units. We'll figure out pretty quickly who's worth learning from and who we can just tolerate until we move on to real assignments." His roommates accepted this analysis with the same confidence they'd shown in his assessment of Rodriguez. That evening, as Chen prepared for his first day of training, he felt the familiar satisfaction of having quickly established his position within a new environment. He'd identified the key players, assessed the competition, and positioned himself for success. His natural talent, combined with his ability to navigate military hierarchies, virtually guaranteed that his time at Fort Cascade would be another step toward the elite assignments he knew he deserved. What Chen couldn't have anticipated was that his carefully constructed understanding of the people around him was about to be challenged in ways that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about competence, leadership, and the true meaning of military excellence. The woman he'd dismissed as Butterfingers was carrying secrets that would shatter his worldview and teach him that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who choose to remain hidden in plain sight. The morning alarm at Fort Cascade came at 0530, giving personnel just enough time to prepare for the day's training activities. Chen woke feeling energized and ready to demonstrate the shooting skills that had brought him to this elite facility. His confidence was unshakable, built on years of consistent success and recognition for his natural abilities. The first surprise came during the initial formation when Staff Sergeant Tony Martinez addressed the new arrivals with a seriousness that seemed disproportionate to what Chen expected would be routine marksmanship training. Martinez was a compact man whose bearing suggested extensive combat experience, and his manner commanded immediate attention from even the most confident recruits. "Fort Cascade isn't just another training facility," Martinez began, his voice carrying across the formation with practiced authority. "You're here because someone believes you have the potential to become more than just good shooters. The question is whether you have the character to match your technical skills." Chen listened with interest, interpreting this as confirmation that he belonged among an elite group. Martinez continued his briefing by explaining that Cascade's training program went far beyond basic marksmanship Students would be evaluated not just on their shooting accuracy, but on their decision-making under pressure, their ability to work as part of a team, and their understanding of the broader implications of precision shooting in military operations. Chen absorbed this information confidently, seeing it as an opportunity to demonstrate his superiority across multiple dimensions. The formation was dismissed with instructions to report to Range Complex Alpha for initial assessments. Chen joined the flow of personnel moving toward the ranges, noting the serious expressions on the faces of the permanent staff. There was an intensity about Fort Cascade that went beyond typical military training facilities, though Chen attributed this to the high standards rather than any particular complexity he might not yet understand. Range Complex Alpha was an impressive facility featuring multiple shooting positions at distances ranging from 100 to 1,000 meters. The targets themselves were sophisticated, incorporating electronic scoring systems and the ability to simulate various combat scenarios. Chen was impressed by the technology, but he was also confident that his natural abilities would allow him to excel regardless of the equipment's sophistication. Rodriguez was present at the range, apparently responsible for equipment distribution and maintenance of the electronic systems. Chen watched as she moved between the shooting positions, checking equipment and making notes on her clipboard. Her movements still seemed careful and deliberate, and Chen noticed that she avoided handling the more delicate optical equipment, apparently leaving that to other personnel. "All right, people," Martinez announced once everyone had assembled. "Today's assessment will establish your baseline capabilities. You'll engage targets at 300, 500, and 800 meters using standard issue equipment. No fancy optics, no special ammunition. We want to see what you can do with basic tools before we start adding complexity." Chen felt a surge of anticipation. This was exactly the kind of challenge where his natural talent would shine. He'd consistently outperformed other shooters at these distances, and he expected to establish himself immediately as the top performer in this group. As personnel were assigned to shooting positions, Chen positioned himself where his performance would be clearly visible to the instructors. The first series of shots at 300 meters proceeded exactly as Chen expected. His groupings were tight and consistently on target, earning nods of approval from Martinez and the other evaluating instructors. Chen was aware of Rodriguez moving behind the shooting line, apparently monitoring the electronic scoring systems, but he paid little attention to her presence. His focus was on demonstrating the excellence that had brought him here. At 500 meters, Chen continued to excel, though he noticed that several other shooters were also performing at high levels. The competition was definitely stronger than he'd encountered in previous training environments, but Chen remained confident in his abilities. He was particularly pleased to see that his roommates were struggling somewhat with the longer distances, confirming his position as the natural leader of their group. The 800-meter targets represented a significant challenge, requiring not just technical shooting skills, but also understanding of wind conditions and environmental factors that could affect bullet trajectory. Chen had less experience at this distance, but his confidence remained high as he prepared for what he expected would be another demonstration of his superiority. The first shot missed the target entirely, much to Chen's surprise. He quickly adjusted his aim and fired again, achieving a hit but not the precise placement he'd expected. The third shot was better, but Chen realized that 800-meter shooting required skills he hadn't fully developed. For the first time since arriving at Cascade, he experienced a moment of uncertainty about his abilities. Martinez appeared beside Chen's shooting position as he prepared for his final shots of the assessment. "Long-distance shooting is different from what you're used to, Private," the instructor observed. "It's not just about steady hands and good eyesight. You have to understand the environment, read conditions that aren't obvious, and make calculations that go beyond basic marksmanship." Chen nodded, accepting the guidance while simultaneously analyzing what he needed to do differently. His natural problem-solving abilities kicked in, and he began making mental notes about factors he'd overlooked. This was just another skill to master, and Chen was confident he could adapt quickly. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Martinez called out toward the equipment area. "Could you demonstrate the proper technique for reading wind conditions at this distance?" Chen looked up in surprise, wondering why Martinez would ask the clumsy equipment sergeant to provide instruction on shooting techniques. Rodriguez set down her clipboard and moved toward Chen's shooting position with the same careful deliberation she'd shown in other activities. Chen expected her to fumble through some basic explanation that would probably be less useful than Martinez could provide himself. Instead, Rodriguez knelt beside the shooting position and began pointing out environmental indicators that Chen had completely missed. "See how the grass is moving about halfway to the target?" she said quietly. "That tells you the wind speed and direction in the middle of your bullet's path, which is more important than what you feel here at the shooting position." Her voice carried a confidence that seemed inconsistent with her reputation for clumsiness. "The mirage coming off. That dark patch of ground indicates thermal effects that will push your bullet left about 2 inches at this distance." Chen listened with growing amazement as Rodriguez provided insights into long-distance shooting that went far beyond anything he'd learned in his previous training. Her analysis was detailed, technical, and delivered with the kind of expertise that suggested extensive experience. Yet this was the same person he'd watched drop equipment and fumble with basic tasks just hours earlier. "Try your next shot accounting for those factors," Rodriguez suggested, stepping back to give Chen room to work. Chen made the adjustments she'd recommended and fired, achieving a center hit that drew an approving nod from Martinez. The improvement was dramatic and immediate, leaving Chen confused about how someone with Rodriguez's reputation for clumsiness could possess such sophisticated shooting knowledge. As the assessment continued, Chen found himself observing Rodriguez more carefully. When she worked with other struggling shooters, her guidance was consistently excellent, delivered with patience and technical precision that seemed to contradict everything he'd observed about her general competence. Chen began to wonder if he'd misunderstood something fundamental about the equipment sergeant. The day's training concluded with Martinez providing feedback to the group about their performance levels and areas for improvement. Chen had performed well overall, ranking in the top tier of the new arrivals, but the 800-meter targets had humbled him in ways he hadn't expected. More puzzling was Rodriguez's demonstrated expertise in areas where Chen had assumed she lacked competence. Walking back to the barracks that evening, Chen found himself reconsidering his initial assessment of Fort Cascade's personnel. Rodriguez's shooting knowledge was undeniably sophisticated, yet she continued to handle routine equipment tasks with the same careful uncertainty he'd noticed from the beginning. The contradiction was troubling to someone who prided himself on reading people accurately. "What did you think of Sergeant Rodriguez's shooting advice?" Kim asked as they prepared for evening chow. Chen realized that his roommates had also noticed the disconnect between Rodriguez's apparent clumsiness and her technical expertise. "She definitely knows her stuff about long-distance shooting," Chen admitted reluctantly. "I'm just surprised that someone with that kind of knowledge is working in equipment rather than as a primary instructor." Rivera nodded thoughtfully, apparently having similar observations. "Maybe she's better with theory than practice," Morrison suggested. "Some people can explain techniques they can't actually perform themselves." Chen found this explanation appealing because it allowed him to maintain his overall assessment of Rodriguez while accounting for her unexpected expertise. That night, as Chen lay in his bunk reviewing the day's events, he felt his confidence returning. The 800-meter shooting had been a learning experience, but he was already formulating plans for improvement. Rodriguez's guidance had been helpful, but Chen attributed that to book learning rather than practical experience. He remained convinced that his natural abilities would allow him to excel once he mastered the additional technical skills required for long-distance precision shooting. What Chen didn't realize was that his carefully maintained worldview was about to be challenged in ways that would force him to question everything he thought he understood about competence, reputation, and the complex relationship between appearance and reality in military service. The following weeks at Fort Cascade established a routine that reinforced Chen's initial impressions while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt he was too proud to acknowledge. Each morning brought new training exercises, and each day provided fresh examples of what Chen interpreted as Rodriguez's fundamental incompetence with basic military tasks. Chen's audience grew as he shared his observations with an expanding circle of fellow trainees who found his commentary both entertaining and seemingly insightful. During breakfast conversations, he would recount Rodriguez's latest mishaps with the theatrical flair of someone who enjoyed being the center of attention. His natural charisma and apparent expertise in reading people made him a magnet for other soldiers seeking to understand the social dynamics of their new environment. "You should have seen her yesterday trying to inventory the scope mounts," Chen told his breakfast table companions, gesturing with his coffee cup for emphasis. "She must have counted the same box 3 times, and I swear she looked confused every time she got a different number." The group laughed appreciatively, enjoying Chen's storytelling abilities and his apparent insight into the base's personnel. Private Danny Walsh, a newer arrival who'd quickly gravitated toward Chen's circle, shook his head in mock disbelief. How does someone like that end up in charge of equipment that costs more than most people's cars? Chen appreciated Walsh's question because it validated his own assessment while giving him an opportunity to demonstrate his understanding of military bureaucracy. "Time and service," Chen explained with the confidence of someone who'd figured out the system. "The military promotes people based on tenure and avoiding major disasters, not necessarily competence. Rodriguez has probably been around long enough that they had to give her stripes, but they stuck her somewhere she can't do too much damage." His explanation was accepted without question, reinforcing Chen's position as the group's informal authority on base personnel. Chen's growing reputation as someone who could read people and situations attracted attention from trainees across multiple training cycles. His confidence was magnetic, and his apparent success in the shooting programs gave weight to his social observations. By the 3rd week of his assignment, Chen had become the unofficial spokesperson for a significant portion of the junior enlisted personnel, a role he embraced with enthusiasm. The pattern of Rodriguez's apparent mishaps continued. With clockwork regularity, Chen witnessed her struggle with computer terminals that seemed to confuse her, watched her fumble with equipment manifests, and observed her careful, almost fearful approach to handling delicate optical gear. Each incident reinforced his conviction that she was fundamentally mismatched for her position, a conviction he shared freely with anyone willing to listen. During an equipment maintenance session, Chen watched Rodriguez attempt to calibrate a digital scope system, apparently requiring multiple attempts to achieve settings that Chen believed should have been straightforward for anyone familiar with the technology. "She's probably going to break that thing," he murmured to Morrison, who was working at a nearby station. Rodriguez's movements were cautious to the point of appearing incompetent, and Chen noted how she constantly referred to technical manuals for procedures that more capable personnel would know by memory. "Maybe she's just being careful," Morrison suggested, though his tone indicated he found Chen's assessment more convincing. Chen appreciated the diplomatic response, but felt compelled to educate his friend about what they were really observing. "There's a difference between being careful and being unsure of what you're doing," Chen explained patiently. "Look at how she holds the equipment. She's afraid of it. Someone who really knew these systems would handle them with confidence." Morrison nodded thoughtfully, accepting Chen's analysis as more sophisticated than his own initial impulse toward charity. Chen's commentary extended beyond Rodriguez to encompass his growing understanding of Fort Cascade's entire personnel structure. He'd identified what he believed were similar patterns of mediocrity among various support staff, creating a comprehensive theory about military advancement that painted him as unusually perceptive about human nature and institutional dynamics. The real performers are obvious, Chen explained to his expanding audience during an evening conversation in the barracks common area. Martinez knows his stuff, and so do most of the primary instructors. But look at the support positions. They're filled with people who couldn't cut it in operational roles, but had to be placed somewhere. His listeners absorbed this wisdom, eagerly, grateful for Chen's apparent insight into military hierarchy. Corporal Lisa Park, a communications specialist who joined Chen's informal following, raised a question that had been bothering her. But Sergeant Rodriguez seems to know a lot about shooting techniques. Remember when she helped you with that long-distance shot? Chen had been expecting this question and had prepared what he believed was a sophisticated answer. Book learning, Chen replied dismissively. She's probably studied the manuals extensively because she knows she doesn't have practical experience. It's like meeting someone who can quote every football statistic, but has never actually played the game. Theory doesn't translate to real capability. Park nodded appreciatively, impressed by Chen's ability to explain apparent contradictions. Chen's growing confidence in his assessment of base personnel led him to become increasingly bold in his commentary. He began making jokes about Rodriguez's equipment handling skills during training sessions, always carefully staying within the bounds of military discipline, but ensuring his humor was noticed by both peers and, he believed, superiors, who would appreciate his perceptiveness. During a particularly complex training exercise involving night vision equipment, Rodriguez appeared to struggle with the setup procedures, requiring assistance from technical specialists to properly configure the systems. Chen watched with satisfaction, as his predictions about her incompetence seemed to be validated in real time. He made subtle comments to nearby trainees about the inefficiency of having someone uncertain about the equipment responsible for its distribution and maintenance. I could probably do her job better after reading the manual once, Chen confided to Rivera during a break in the exercise. It's honestly painful to watch someone fumble through procedures that should be routine for anyone in that position. Rivera agreed, having been influenced by weeks of Chen's commentary to see Rodriguez through the lens of assumed incompetence. Chen's reputation for insightful personnel assessment attracted attention from some of the senior trainees who were preparing for graduation from Cascade's program. They sought his opinions about various staff members and seemed to value his observations about base dynamics. This validation from more experienced personnel reinforced Chen's confidence in his analytical abilities and his belief that he was destined for leadership positions. Private First Class Amanda Torres, who was completing her final week of training, approached Chen after a particularly successful shooting session. "You've got a good read on people," she told him. "Have you considered trying for military intelligence? They need people who can assess personnel and situations quickly." Chen was flattered by the suggestion and filed it away as another confirmation of his exceptional abilities. The suggestion that he possessed natural intelligence-gathering skills appealed to Chen's sense of his own capabilities. He began paying even closer attention to the behavior patterns of base personnel, looking for insights that would demonstrate his analytical sophistication. Rodriguez remained his primary case study, a person whose apparent contradictions he believed he'd successfully explained through his theory about book learning versus practical competence. Chen's observations extended to Rodriguez's interactions with other base personnel, where he noted what he interpreted as a pattern of deference that suggested others shared his assessment of her limited capabilities. When senior NCOs spoke with Rodriguez, Chen observed what he believed was a careful politeness that masked underlying concerns about her competence. He didn't recognize the subtle signs of respect that actually characterized these interactions. During a weapons maintenance class, Chen watched Rodriguez demonstrate cleaning procedures for the advanced rifle systems used in Cascade's precision shooting programs. Her movements were methodical and precise, but Chen interpreted her careful approach as evidence that she was following memorized procedures rather than working from genuine understanding. When she answered technical questions from trainees, Chen noted that she often consulted reference materials, which he saw as proof of her uncertainty. A real expert wouldn't need to check the manual every 5 minutes. Chen observed to his usual audience during the evening meal. She's basically reading instructions to people who could probably figure it out themselves with a little experimentation. His commentary was accepted as insightful analysis, reinforcing his position as someone who could see through appearances to underlying realities. Chen's growing boldness led him to begin making subtle challenges to Rodriguez's expertise during training sessions. When she provided technical guidance, he would ask follow-up questions designed to expose what he believed were gaps in her knowledge. Rodriguez responded to these challenges with patience and detailed explanations, but Chen interpreted her thoroughness as evidence that she was working hard to cover her inadequacies. The morning that would mark the beginning of Chen's first serious doubts about his assessments started with what appeared to be another typical example of Rodriguez's clumsiness. She dropped a box of ammunition while preparing for a long-distance shooting exercise, sending cartridges rolling across the concrete floor of the equipment depot. Chen and several other trainees witnessed the incident, and Chen made his usual subtle commentary about equipment handling skills. "Butterfingers strikes again," he murmured to Walsh, who was helping gather the scattered ammunition. "I'm starting to wonder if they should trust her with anything more dangerous than paperwork." Walsh laughed appreciatively, enjoying Chen's humor while helping Rodriguez collect the dropped cartridges. What Chen didn't notice was the way Rodriguez's eyes tracked across the scattered ammunition, making rapid calculations about inventory that would have impressed him if he'd understood what he was seeing. He also missed the subtle way she used the incident to conduct an impromptu inspection of the cartridges, identifying several that showed signs of potential defects that could have caused dangerous malfunctions during the exercise. Rodriguez's request that the exercise be delayed while she verified the condition of the ammunition struck Chen as another example of her excessive caution and lack of confidence. He interpreted her concerns as the nervous overreaction of someone who was afraid of taking responsibility for decisions. The delay annoyed several trainees who were eager to begin the shooting exercise, and Chen noted their irritation as validation of his assessment. "She's probably worried about getting in trouble if anything goes wrong," Chen explained to the group of increasingly frustrated trainees. People who aren't confident in their abilities tend to overthink everything because they're afraid of making mistakes. His explanation seemed reasonable to trainees who were more interested in getting to the shooting range than understanding ammunition quality control procedures. The investigation Rodriguez conducted over the next hour struck Chen as unnecessarily elaborate. She examined each cartridge individually, checking for signs of corrosion, measuring powder loads, and verifying that all ammunition met specifications for the day's precision shooting exercise. Chen watched with growing impatience as she went through procedures that seemed designed more to demonstrate thoroughness than to address any real safety concerns. "This is ridiculous," Chen muttered to Morrison, who was also growing frustrated with the delay. "How hard is it to count ammunition and confirm it's the right caliber? She's turning a 5-minute task into an hour-long production." Morrison nodded agreement, sharing Chen's irritation at what seemed like inefficiency driven by incompetence. When Rodriguez finally announced that the exercise could proceed, but with replacement ammunition from a different lot, Chen assumed she'd simply wanted to appear important by creating unnecessary complications. He didn't understand that she'd identified potential manufacturing defects that could have caused dangerous pressure variations during precision shooting. Her thoroughness wasn't driven by incompetence, but by expertise that Chen lacked the experience to recognize. The shooting exercise itself proceeded without incident, largely because Rodriguez's ammunition inspection had eliminated cartridges that would have produced erratic performance and potentially dangerous pressure spikes. Chen achieved excellent scores with the replacement ammunition, attributing his success to his natural shooting ability, rather than the careful preparation that had ensured consistent performance from his equipment. During the post-exercise debrief, Staff Sergeant Martinez made casual reference to the ammunition inspection, noting that quality control procedures had prevented potential safety issues. Chen assumed this was diplomatic language designed to make Rodriguez feel better about the delay she'd caused. He didn't recognize Martinez's comment as genuine appreciation for professional competence that had avoided serious problems. Chen's confidence in his assessment of Rodriguez reached new heights as he recounted the day's events to his evening audience. His story of the ammunition incident became an elaborate narrative about bureaucratic incompetence and the ways that uncertain personnel created inefficiency through excessive caution. His listeners absorbed the story enthusiastically, enjoying Chen's humor while accepting his interpretation of events they hadn't witnessed themselves. The best part was watching Martinez try to make her feel better about wasting everyone's time. Chen concluded his narrative. You could tell he was annoyed by the delay, but he had to say something supportive because she's technically his subordinate. The group appreciated Chen's insight into military diplomacy, seeing it as evidence of his sophisticated understanding of interpersonal dynamics. What Chen couldn't have imagined was that his carefully constructed theory about Rodriguez's incompetence was about to encounter evidence that would challenge everything he believed he understood about competence, expertise, and the complex relationship between appearance and reality in military service. The woman he'd dismissed as Butterfingers was carrying secrets that would force him to reconsider not just his assessment of her, but his fundamental approach to evaluating people and situations. The fourth week of Chen's assignment to Fort Cascade brought the first serious cracks in his confident assessment of the base's personnel dynamics. These inconsistencies appeared gradually, small contradictions that Chen initially dismissed, but which accumulated into a pattern that even his considerable self-assurance couldn't entirely ignore. The first significant inconsistency emerged during an advanced ballistics lecture delivered by Captain James Wilson, the base's senior instructor for long-distance precision shooting. Wilson was explaining the complex calculations required for extreme-range shots when he made a casual reference that stopped Chen's note-taking entirely. The theoretical maximum effective range for this rifle system is 1,800 meters under ideal conditions, Wilson explained to the assembled trainees. However, practical limitations typically restrict effective engagement to 1,200 meters. Sergeant Rodriguez and I were discussing some modifications to the ballistic calculation software that might extend practical range by accounting for atmospheric variables more precisely. Chen felt a moment of confusion at Wilson's casual mention. O.F. Rodriguez as a collaborator on advanced ballistic calculations. In Chen's understanding, Rodriguez was an equipment clerk who struggled with basic inventory management. The idea that she would be involved in sophisticated software development seemed fundamentally inconsistent with everything he'd observed about her capabilities. Sir, Chen raised his hand, seeking clarification that might resolve the apparent contradiction. Is Sergeant Rodriguez involved in software development for the ballistic systems? Wilson looked mildly surprised by the question, as if Chen had asked about something obvious. Rodriguez has extensive experience with ballistic calculation software, Wilson replied matter-of-factly. Her input on the atmospheric modeling algorithms has been invaluable for improving accuracy predictions at extreme ranges. Wilson's response was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing well-established facts, leaving Chen more confused than enlightened. Chen spent the remainder of the lecture trying to reconcile Wilson's comments with his observations. of Rodriguez's apparent struggles with much simpler computer systems. Perhaps she had specialized knowledge in one narrow area while remaining incompetent in others. Or maybe Wilson was being diplomatically generous in describing her contributions. Chen ultimately decided that Wilson was probably giving Rodriguez more credit than she deserved for what were likely minor suggestions. The second inconsistency occurred during a practical exercise focused on reading environmental conditions for precision shooting. Chen had been struggling with wind estimation techniques when Martinez assigned Rodriguez to provide individual coaching for trainees who needed additional guidance. Chen initially felt embarrassed to be receiving instruction from someone he'd publicly characterized as incompetent, but he decided to accept the help while maintaining his private skepticism. Rodriguez's coaching session revealed a depth of knowledge that Chen found difficult to dismiss. She didn't just explain wind reading techniques. She provided insights into atmospheric physics that went far beyond anything Chen had encountered in his previous training. Her explanations of thermal effects, pressure variations, and humidity impacts on bullet trajectory were delivered with casual expertise that suggested extensive study and practical experience. The mirage patterns you're seeing indicate layered thermal gradients, Rodriguez explained as Chen struggled to interpret the heat shimmer rising from the target area. When you see that kind of layering, your bullet path will be affected differently at various distances. You need to calculate compensation for each thermal layer, rather than using average conditions for the entire flight path. Chen found himself taking detailed notes on Rodriguez's explanations, recognizing that her guidance was more sophisticated than anything he'd received from the primary instructors. Her knowledge wasn't just theoretical. She provided practical techniques for reading environmental conditions that immediately improved Chen's shooting accuracy. The contradiction between her apparent equipment handling incompetence and her ballistic expertise was becoming impossible to ignore. "Where did you learn these techniques?" Chen asked, hoping Rodriguez's answer might explain the inconsistencies he was observing. Rodriguez's response was characteristically modest and uninformative. "Experience and study," she replied simply. Precision shooting requires understanding a lot of variables that aren't obvious at first. Chen found her answer frustratingly vague, but he noted that she'd avoided claiming extensive field experience, which seemed consistent with his theory about book learning versus practical knowledge. The third inconsistency appeared during a classified briefing about current military operations where precision shooting was playing critical roles. The briefing was conducted by Major Patricia Coleman from Regional Command, who'd arrived to discuss how Cascade's training program aligned with operational requirements in active theater zones. Coleman's presentation included detailed analysis of recent successful precision shooting operations, including several cases where single shots had achieved strategic objectives that would otherwise have required extensive military operations. Chen found the briefings fascinating, seeing them as previews of the kind of elite missions he hoped to be selected for after completing his training. The operation designated Crimson Dawn represents the current standard for precision shooting under extreme conditions, Coleman explained, displaying a map that showed a target position over 1,600 meters from the shooter's location. Environmental conditions included variable crosswinds, temperature gradients, and atmospheric pressure changes that required real-time calculation adjustments. Chen studied the tactical situation with professional interest, noting the complexity of the shot and the strategic importance of its success. Coleman continued her analysis by explaining how the shooter had overcome each environmental challenge through superior preparation and expert knowledge of ballistic principles. Questions about the technical aspects of this operation should be directed to Sergeant Rodriguez, Coleman concluded unexpectedly. She provided consultation on the ballistic calculations and environmental analysis that made this shot possible. Chen felt his understanding of reality shift slightly as Coleman's words registered. The idea that Rodriguez had been involved in planning successful military operations contradicted everything Chen believed he knew about her capabilities. Coleman's statement wasn't delivered as diplomatic courtesy or generous attribution. It was presented as factual information about Rodriguez's professional contributions to active military operations. Chen raised his hand again, seeking clarification. That might resolve this latest contradiction. Ma'am, are you saying that Sergeant Rodriguez was directly involved in planning precision shooting operations? Coleman looked at Chen with mild surprise, as if he'd asked about something that should have been obvious. Rodriguez is one of our primary consultants for complex ballistic calculations, Coleman explained patiently. Her expertise in extreme range shooting has been invaluable for operations requiring precision beyond normal parameters. Coleman's tone suggested that Rodriguez's expertise was well established within military circles that Chen hadn't previously encountered. The accumulation of inconsistencies was beginning to create cognitive dissonance that Chen found increasingly difficult to manage. Each new piece of information about Rodriguez's apparent expertise contradicted his carefully constructed assessment of her incompetence, yet he continued to witness daily examples of her struggles with routine equipment management tasks. Chen decided that the solution was more systematic investigation. If Rodriguez possessed hidden expertise, he would uncover evidence that explained the contradictions he was observing. His analytical approach had served him well in previous situations, and he was confident that careful research would either confirm his original assessment or reveal new information that made sense of the conflicting data. The base library at Fort Cascade was a modest facility that maintained technical manuals, operational histories, and classified documents related to precision shooting and advanced marksmanship techniques. Chen had visited the library occasionally for research related to his training, but he'd never conducted the kind of systematic investigation he now planned. Chen's research began with technical publications related to ballistic calculation software and environmental analysis for precision shooting. He hoped to find evidence of Rodriguez's claimed contributions that would either confirm her expertise or reveal the limited nature of her actual involvement. What he discovered was more troubling than either outcome he'd anticipated. Rodriguez's name appeared as primary author or co-author on numerous technical publications related to precision shooting, environmental analysis, and ballistic calculation methods. These weren't minor contributions or generous attributions. They were substantial technical works that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of physics, mathematics, and practical shooting applications. Chen examined several of Rodriguez's publications in detail, finding them to be highly technical and professionally written. Her work on atmospheric modeling for extreme-range shooting was particularly impressive, incorporating advanced mathematical concepts that Chen only partially understood. The sophistication of her technical writing contradicted everything he believed about her intellectual capabilities. The dates on Rodriguez's publications extended back several years, indicating that her expertise in precision shooting had been recognized long before her assignment to Fort Cascade. Chen found evidence that her work had been incorporated into military training programs and had influenced standard procedures for precision shooting operations. Her contributions weren't recent developments, but established elements of military doctrine. Chen's investigation revealed that Rodriguez had been invited to speak at military conferences, had consulted on equipment development projects, and had provided technical expertise for operational planning in active military theaters. The scope of her professional activities was far broader than anything Chen had imagined, spanning multiple aspects of precision shooting and ballistic analysis. The most troubling discovery was a commendation letter from a general officer praising Rodriguez's contributions to successful military operations. The letter described her as one of the military's foremost experts in extreme-range precision shooting, and credited her expertise with saving lives and achieving strategic objectives that would otherwise have been impossible. Chen sat in the library for over an hour, staring at documents that fundamentally challenged his understanding of Rodriguez and his confidence in his own ability to assess people accurately. The woman he'd dismissed as Butterfingers was apparently recognized within military circles as a leading expert in precisely the field where Chen hoped to distinguish himself. The contradiction between Rodriguez's documented expertise and her apparent struggles with routine tasks was becoming impossible to rationalize through his previous theories about book learning versus practical experience. Her technical publications demonstrated not just theoretical knowledge, but practical experience with precision shooting under conditions that Chen had never encountered. Chen's research revealed that Rodriguez had been assigned to Fort Cascade specifically because of her expertise, not despite any incompetence. Her role as equipment sergeant was apparently a cover assignment that allowed her to work with advanced precision shooting programs while maintaining operational security about her background and specialized knowledge. The realization that he had fundamentally misunderstood Rodriguez's position and capabilities was deeply unsettling for Chen. His confidence in reading people and situations had been one of his defining characteristics, and the discovery that he'd been completely wrong about someone he'd observed daily for weeks challenged his sense of his own analytical abilities. Chen left the library that evening with more questions than answers. Rodriguez's documented expertise was undeniable, but Chen continued to witness her apparent struggles with routine equipment tasks. Either she was deliberately concealing her capabilities for reasons Chen couldn't understand, or there were aspects of military service and personnel management that were far more complex than he'd realized. The walk back to his barracks gave Chen time to consider the implications of what he'd discovered. If Rodriguez was indeed an expert in precision shooting, then his weeks of commentary about her incompetence had revealed his own ignorance rather than her limitations. The possibility that he'd been publicly wrong about something so fundamental was deeply embarrassing for someone who prided himself on perceptiveness and accuracy. More troubling was the realization that other base personnel had probably been aware of Rodriguez's expertise while Chen had been making jokes about her supposed incompetence. His confident commentary about personnel assessment might have marked him as naive and judgmental rather than insightful and perceptive. Chen decided that he needed to observe Rodriguez more carefully, looking for evidence that would either confirm or refute what he'd discovered in the library. If she was indeed concealing expertise, he should be able to detect signs of her true capabilities through more systematic observation. His analytical skills might have been temporarily confused by incomplete information, but careful study should reveal the truth about Rodriguez's actual competence. The evidence Chen had uncovered in the library created an uncomfortable tension that he carried into every subsequent interaction with Rodriguez. He found himself watching her with new intensity, searching for signs that would either confirm her hidden expertise or reveal flaws in the documentation he'd discovered. This scrutiny led to observations that only deepened the mystery surrounding the woman everyone called Butterfingers. During a routine equipment inspection the morning after his library research, Chen positioned himself where he could observe Rodriguez's work methods without appearing to stare. She was conducting her weekly inventory of optical equipment, a task that typically took her longer than other personnel would require. Chen watched as she handled each scope and rangefinder with exaggerated care, making detailed notes about condition and performance specifications. What Chen hadn't noticed before was the sophisticated nature of Rodriguez's inspection process. She wasn't simply counting items and checking serial numbers. She was conducting detailed technical assessments that required intimate knowledge of optical systems, electronic components, and precision manufacturing tolerances. Her notes contained technical observations that Chen realized he wouldn't have been capable of making himself. When Rodriguez examined a thermal imaging scope that had been returned from field testing, her inspection revealed irregularities in the calibration that had escaped notice during standard maintenance procedures. Chen watched as she identified specific technical issues that required manufacturer attention, her analysis demonstrating expertise that seemed incompatible with someone who supposedly struggled with basic equipment management. The thermal compensation algorithm appears to be drifting at temperature extremes, Rodriguez noted to the maintenance technician assisting with the inspection. The variance is within acceptable parameters for standard operations, but it would affect accuracy for precision applications requiring thermal imaging at extended ranges. Her assessment was delivered with casual confidence that suggested routine expertise rather than lucky observation. Chen found himself taking mental notes about Rodriguez's technical vocabulary and analytical approach. Her knowledge of thermal imaging technology was clearly extensive, incorporating understanding of both hardware specifications and operational applications that went far beyond basic equipment familiarity. The contradiction between her apparent clumsiness and her technical expertise was becoming impossible to ignore. The technician assisting Rodriguez accepted her assessment without question, apparently accustomed to her technical insights. Chen noticed that maintenance personnel routinely deferred to Rodriguez's judgments about equipment condition and performance, behavior that suggested established respect for her expertise rather than polite tolerance of a fumbling supervisor. During the mid-morning break, Chen overheard a conversation between two senior technicians that provided additional context for Rodriguez's role in equipment management. The technicians were discussing modifications to the ballistic calculation software used in advanced precision shooting, and Rodriguez's name came up repeatedly as the primary authority on implementation requirements. Rodriguez wants the atmospheric pressure compensation updated before next week's long-range exercises, one technician explained to the other. She's identified several scenarios where the current algorithm produces insufficient accuracy for extreme distance calculations. The technician's tone indicated routine acceptance of Rodriguez's technical authority, rather than reluctant compliance with arbitrary demands. Chen positioned himself where he could listen without appearing to eavesdrop, hoping to learn more about Rodriguez's actual responsibilities and the scope of her technical involvement. The conversation revealed that Rodriguez had been instrumental in developing several equipment modifications that had improved accuracy and reliability for precision shooting operations. The barrel harmonics analysis she completed last month identified resonance patterns that were affecting consistency at distances beyond 1,200 meters. The second technician noted her recommendations for ammunition selection and loading specifications improved our accuracy ratings by 12%. Chen struggled to reconcile this information with his observations of Rodriguez's struggles with simple inventory procedures. The conversation continued with discussion of Rodriguez's upcoming consultation with manufacturers about next-generation optical systems. Apparently, her input was sought by equipment developers who valued her practical experience and technical insights for improving military precision shooting capabilities. The scope of her professional activities extended far beyond Fort Cascade and encompassed influence on military equipment development at the highest levels. Chen spent the remainder of the morning trying to process the contradiction between Rodriguez's documented expertise and her apparent difficulties with routine tasks. Either she was deliberately concealing her capabilities for reasons he couldn't understand, or his initial assessment of her competence had been so fundamentally flawed that he'd misinterpreted everything he'd observed. The afternoon brought a training exercise that would provide Chen with the most direct evidence yet of Rodriguez's hidden capabilities. Staff Sergeant Martinez announced that the day's training would focus on extreme-range shooting under adverse conditions, with simulated wind patterns and atmospheric disturbances designed to challenge even experienced marksmen. Today's exercise will push you beyond your comfort zones, Martinez explained to the assembled trainees. You'll be engaging targets at 1,400 meters under conditions that require real-time adjustment of shooting techniques and ballistic calculations. Chen felt the familiar surge of competitive enthusiasm, seeing the exercise as an opportunity to demonstrate his natural shooting abilities. The shooting positions were arranged to simulate realistic field conditions, with obstacles, irregular terrain, and environmental factors that complicated target acquisition and range estimation. Chen was assigned to a position that offered challenging shooting angles and required compensation for significant elevation changes between his location and the target area. Rodriguez was present to provide technical support and environmental analysis for trainees who needed assistance with the complex calculations required for successful engagement at extreme ranges. Chen initially assumed this was a routine supervisory role that required minimal technical input, but he soon realized that Rodriguez was conducting sophisticated environmental analysis that influenced every aspect of the shooting exercise. Current atmospheric conditions indicate pressure variations that will affect bullet trajectory differently at various ranges, Rodriguez announced to the group of trainees. Wind patterns are creating thermal layers that will require individual calculation adjustments rather than standard compensation formulas. Her briefing included detailed technical information that Chen realized was beyond his current knowledge level. Chen's first shots at the 1,400-meter targets missed entirely, despite careful application of the techniques he'd learned during previous training. The environmental conditions were more complex than anything he'd previously encountered, and his standard approach to ballistic calculations proved inadequate for the extreme range and adverse conditions. After several unsuccessful attempts, Chen reluctantly approached Rodriguez for assistance, hoping her guidance might help him understand the specific technical challenges posed by the day's exercise. He was prepared for basic advice about wind, compensation, and range estimation, but Rodriguez's analysis revealed environmental factors that Chen hadn't even considered. The thermal inversion layer about 800 meters downrange is creating a mirage effect that's distorting your range estimation, Rodriguez explained, pointing toward atmospheric disturbances that Chen had dismissed as minor heat shimmer. Your actual target distance is approximately 40 meters greater than your rangefinder indicates, and the thermal gradient will push your bullet trajectory left by roughly 6 inches. Chen studied the atmospheric conditions Rodriguez was describing, realizing that her analysis incorporated environmental factors that weren't covered in standard marksmanship training. Her understanding of atmospheric physics and ballistic principles was clearly far more sophisticated than anything he'd encountered, suggesting extensive study and practical experience with extreme range shooting. How do you account for thermal inversion effects in ballistic calculations? Chen asked, hoping Rodriguez's answer might reveal the source of her expertise. Rodriguez's response was characteristically modest, but technically sophisticated. Experience with various atmospheric conditions teaches you to recognize patterns that affect bullet flight, she replied. Temperature gradients, pressure variations, and humidity changes all interact in ways that require individual assessment rather than standard formulas. Her explanation was delivered with casual confidence that suggested routine familiarity with concepts Chen found challenging. Rodriguez provided Chen with specific adjustment recommendations that immediately improved his shooting accuracy. Her guidance incorporated environmental factors he hadn't recognized and calculation methods that produced results significantly better than his previous attempts. The improvement was dramatic enough that Chen couldn't attribute it to lucky advice or general encouragement. As the exercise continued, Chen observed Rodriguez working with other struggling trainees, providing individualized technical guidance that addressed the specific environmental challenges each shooter was facing. Her analysis was consistently sophisticated, and her recommendations consistently effective, demonstrating expertise that seemed incompatible with her reputation for equipment handling difficulties. The most striking moment came when Rodriguez herself took a demonstration shot to illustrate proper technique for the extreme range conditions. Chen expected a competent, but unremarkable performance that would demonstrate basic proficiency without revealing exceptional skill. Instead, Rodriguez's shooting performance was extraordinary. Her preparation for the shot was methodical and professional, incorporating environmental analysis that was more sophisticated than anything Chen had observed from other instructors. She made calculations that accounted for atmospheric variables Chen hadn't even recognized, adjusted her equipment with precision that suggested intimate familiarity with ballistic principles, and achieved target engagement that was flawless under conditions that had challenged every trainee. Rodriguez's shot struck the center of the 1,400-meter target with accuracy that drew appreciative comments from Martinez and the other observing instructors. Her performance wasn't just competent, it was exceptional by any standard Chen could apply. The contradiction between her demonstrated shooting expertise and her apparent struggles with routine equipment handling became impossible to rationalize. Chen spent the remainder of the exercise watching Rodriguez with growing confusion and mounting respect. Her technical guidance was consistently excellent. Her environmental analysis was sophisticated beyond anything he'd encountered, and her practical shooting ability was superior to that of instructors he'd previously considered expert marksmen. The post-exercise debrief included discussion of the environmental factors that had made the day's shooting particularly challenging. Martinez provided technical analysis of atmospheric conditions and their effects on ballistic performance, but he frequently deferred to Rodriguez for more detailed explanations of specific phenomena. Sergeant Rodriguez identified several atmospheric anomalies that affected today's shooting. Martinez explained to the assembled trainees. Her analysis of thermal gradients and pressure variations provided the environmental data that made successful target engagement possible under these conditions. Martinez's acknowledgement was delivered with genuine respect rather than diplomatic courtesy. Rodriguez's technical presentation during the debrief revealed knowledge that Chen realized was far beyond his current understanding. Her explanation of atmospheric physics, ballistic principles, and environmental analysis incorporated concepts that would require years of study and practical experience to master. Chen found himself taking detailed notes, recognizing that Rodriguez was providing education he couldn't obtain elsewhere. The evening meal provided an opportunity for Chen to discuss the day's revelations with his usual circle of friends and admirers. However, he found himself reluctant to share his growing uncertainty about Rodriguez's capabilities, partly because it would require admitting error in his previous assessments, and partly because he wasn't sure how to explain the contradictions he was observing. How did the extreme range exercise go? Walsh asked, expecting Chen's usual confident analysis of training activities and personnel performance. Chen struggled to formulate a response that acknowledged Rodriguez's demonstrated expertise without completely contradicting his previous commentary about her supposed incompetence. "It was more challenging than I expected," Chen replied carefully. "The environmental conditions were complex, and some of the technical guidance was more sophisticated than standard training." His response was deliberately vague, avoiding specific mention of Rodriguez while acknowledging that the day had challenged his assumptions. Morrison pressed for more details about the technical aspects of the exercise, particularly the environmental analysis that had been required for successful target engagement. Chen found himself describing Rodriguez's atmospheric analysis and technical guidance without directly crediting her expertise, a verbal gymnastics routine that left him feeling dishonest and confused. "Sounds like whoever provided the environmental analysis really knew their stuff," Kim observed, unwittingly highlighting the contradiction Chen was struggling to manage. Chen agreed noncommittally, unable to acknowledge Rodriguez's expertise without undermining his carefully constructed reputation for perceptive personnel assessment. That evening, Chen lay in his bunk reviewing the day's events and trying to reconcile the evidence he'd accumulated about Rodriguez's capabilities. Her documented expertise, demonstrated knowledge, and exceptional shooting performance created a picture that contradicted everything he believed about her competence. Yet he continued to witness daily examples of her apparent struggles with routine tasks. The possibility that he'd been fundamentally wrong about Rodriguez was deeply troubling for someone who prided himself on analytical accuracy and social perceptiveness. Chen had built his reputation at Fort Cascade partly on his claimed ability to read people and situations, and the discovery that he'd completely misunderstood someone he'd observed daily for weeks was profoundly unsettling. More troubling was the realization that his weeks of commentary about Rodriguez's supposed incompetence might have marked him as naive and judgmental rather than insightful and perceptive. If other personnel were aware of Rodriguez's expertise, while Chen had been making jokes about her capabilities, his credibility as a personnel analyst would be seriously damaged. Chen decided that he needed to conduct more systematic observation of Rodriguez, looking for evidence that would either confirm her expertise or reveal explanations for the contradictions he was observing. His analytical approach had been temporarily confused by incomplete information, but careful study should reveal the truth about Rodriguez's actual capabilities and role at Fort Cascade. The following weeks brought a series of incidents that systematically demolished Chen's remaining confidence in his assessment of Rodriguez while providing increasingly clear evidence of expertise he'd been too blind to recognize. Each new revelation forced Chen to reconsider not just his understanding of Rodriguez, but his fundamental approach to evaluating people and situations. The first major revelation came during a classified briefing about precision shooting operations in active theater zones. Major Coleman returned to Fort Cascade with updated information about military operations where extreme-range shooting was playing critical strategic roles, and her presentation included detailed analysis of recent successful missions that had achieved strategic objectives through precision marksmanship. Operation Silver Arrow represents current best practices for precision shooting under extreme environmental conditions, Coleman explained, displaying tactical maps that showed shooter positions over 1,800 meters from target locations. Environmental factors included variable crosswinds, atmospheric pressure changes, and thermal gradients that required real-time calculation adjustments and adaptive shooting techniques. Chen studied the operational details with professional interest, noting the complexity of the environmental challenges and the precision required for successful mission completion. The strategic importance of the precision shooting missions was clear, but Chen was more interested in the technical aspects that might inform his own training and career development. Questions about the technical planning and execution of Operation Silver Arrow should be directed to Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Coleman announced. However, Colonel Mitchell's consultation with Sergeant Rodriguez was instrumental in developing the ballistic calculations and environmental analysis that made these missions possible. Chen felt his understanding of reality shift as Coleman's words registered. The idea that Rodriguez had provided consultation for active military operations was difficult enough to accept, but the casual reference to someone named Colonel Mitchell suggested relationships and responsibilities that extended far beyond anything Chen had imagined. "Ma'am," Chen raised his hand, seeking clarification that might help him understand Rodriguez's actual role in military operations. "Could you explain the nature of Sergeant Rodriguez's consultation on these missions?" Coleman looked at Chen with an expression that suggested his question revealed ignorance about well-established facts. "Sergeant Rodriguez is our primary technical consultant for extreme-range precision shooting operations," Coleman explained patiently. "Her expertise in environmental analysis and ballistic calculations is recognized throughout Special Operations Command. Her input is routinely sought for missions requiring precision shooting beyond normal operational parameters." Coleman's explanation was delivered matter-of-factly, as if Rodriguez's expertise and consultation role were common knowledge that Chen should have understood without explanation. The casual reference to Special Operations Command suggested that Rodriguez's influence extended to the highest levels of military precision shooting operations. Chen spent the remainder of the briefing trying to process this latest revelation about Rodriguez's professional activities. If she was indeed consulting on special operations missions, then her role at Fort Cascade was far more significant than equipment management, and her technical expertise was recognized at levels Chen hadn't previously imagined. The second major revelation occurred during an unscheduled visit from a delegation of equipment manufacturers who'd come to Fort Cascade for consultation about next-generation precision shooting systems. Chen learned about the visit when he observed several civilians in business attire being escorted through the facility by senior officers, an unusual occurrence that generated curiosity among the trainees. Chen positioned himself where he could observe the delegation's activities without appearing to intrude, hoping to learn about the nature of their business at Fort Cascade. The group appeared to be conducting technical discussions about equipment specifications and operational requirements, suggesting that Fort Cascade played a role in military equipment development that Chen hadn't previously understood. The surprise came when Chen observed Rodriguez joining the delegation for what appeared to be a formal consultation session. She was introduced to the civilian representatives with obvious respect and deference, suggesting that her expertise was valued by equipment manufacturers who needed military input for their development programs. Chen moved closer to the meeting area, hoping to overhear enough conversation to understand Rodriguez's role in the consultation. What he heard challenged his understanding of her position and responsibilities in ways that were becoming routine, but no less unsettling. The atmospheric modeling algorithms you proposed for the next-generation ballistic computers show significant improvement over current systems, one of the civilian representatives was saying to Rodriguez. Our engineering team believes your recommendations could extend effective range by approximately 200 meters while improving accuracy at all distances. Rodriguez responded with technical analysis that incorporated concepts Chen only partially understood. Her discussion of atmospheric physics, ballistic principles, and computational modeling demonstrated expertise that seemed to bridge theoretical knowledge and practical application in ways that would require years of study and experience to develop. Field testing under various atmospheric conditions will be critical for validating the algorithm performance, Rodriguez noted. Temperature gradients, pressure variations, and humidity effects interact in complex ways that require empirical validation rather than purely theoretical modeling. Her recommendations were delivered with the confidence of someone whose technical opinions were valued and routinely implemented. The consultation continued for over an hour, with Rodriguez providing detailed technical guidance about equipment specifications, operational requirements, and testing protocols. Chen realized that her input was being sought by manufacturers who needed military expertise to develop equipment that would be used by precision shooters throughout the military. Chen's third major revelation came during a conversation he overheard between Staff Sergeant Martinez and Captain Wilson about training program modifications. The two senior instructors were discussing changes to the advanced marksmanship curriculum that would better prepare graduates for operational assignments requiring extreme-range precision shooting. Rodriguez's recommendations for the environmental analysis curriculum should be implemented before the next training cycle, Martinez was saying to Wilson. Her practical experience with atmospheric variables under operational conditions provides insights that aren't available through standard training materials. Martinez's tone indicated routine acceptance of Rodriguez's technical authority in curriculum development. Wilson agreed with Martinez's assessment, noting that Rodriguez's input had consistently improved training program effectiveness. Her contributions to the ballistic calculation software have eliminated several accuracy problems that were affecting graduate performance in operational assignments, Wilson observed. The feedback from units receiving our graduates has improved significantly since we implemented her recommendations. Chen listened with growing amazement as the conversation revealed the scope of Rodriguez's involvement in Fort Cascade's training programs. Apparently, her technical expertise influenced not just equipment management, but curriculum development, software modification, and program evaluation. Her role extended far beyond anything Chen had imagined when he dismissed her as an incompetent equipment clerk. The conversation continued with discussion of Rodriguez's upcoming assignment to evaluate training programs at other military facilities. Apparently, her expertise was valued throughout the military precision shooting community, and her consultation was routinely sought by other training facilities seeking to improve their program effectiveness. Her analysis of the European training facility should provide valuable insights for standardizing environmental analysis training across all precision shooting programs, Martinez noted. The variations in atmospheric conditions between different geographic locations require specialized knowledge that Rodriguez has developed through practical experience. Chen realized that Rodriguez's professional activities extended internationally and influenced military training programs beyond anything he'd previously understood. Her expertise was apparently recognized not just within Special Operations Command, but throughout the global military precision shooting community. The fourth revelation came when Chen discovered that Rodriguez had been scheduled to provide expert testimony at a congressional hearing about military precision shooting capabilities and equipment requirements. The hearing was designed to inform congressional decision-making about defense spending and operational readiness, suggesting that Rodriguez's expertise was valued at the highest levels of government. Chen learned about the congressional hearing through administrative documents he encountered while completing routine paperwork for his training program. Rodriguez's name appeared on travel orders and briefing materials that indicated her testimony would address technical aspects of precision shooting that required specialized expertise. The idea that Rodriguez would be providing expert testimony to Congress was perhaps the most difficult revelation for Chen to process. Congressional hearings represented the highest level of professional recognition, reserved for individuals whose expertise was acknowledged as authoritative within their fields. The contrast between Rodriguez's apparent equipment handling difficulties and her recognition as a congressional expert witness was impossible to rationalize. Chen spent that evening trying to reconcile all the evidence he'd accumulated about Rodriguez's expertise and professional activities. Her documented technical contributions, consultation roles, curriculum influence, and congressional recognition created a picture of someone whose capabilities and responsibilities extended far beyond anything he'd initially understood. The accumulation of evidence was forcing Chen to confront the possibility that he'd been fundamentally wrong about Rodriguez from the beginning. Her apparent clumsiness with routine equipment handling might be deliberate concealment of capabilities, or it might be irrelevant compared to her specialized expertise in areas that Chen lacked the knowledge to properly evaluate. More troubling was the realization that his weeks of commentary about Rodriguez's supposed incompetence had revealed his own ignorance rather than her limitations. The confident personnel assessments that had established his reputation for perceptiveness were apparently based on fundamental misunderstanding of Rodriguez's role, responsibilities, and capabilities. Chen was beginning to understand that military service might be far more complex than he'd realized, with personnel assignments and responsibilities that weren't always obvious to casual observation. Rodriguez's case suggested that some of the most capable people might be those who worked quietly behind the scenes, contributing expertise that influenced major decisions without seeking recognition or acknowledgement. The weekend before what would become the most important revelation of Chen's military career, he made a decision that reflected his growing uncertainty about everything he thought he understood about Fort Cascade and its personnel. He would observe Rodriguez more systematically, looking for evidence that would either confirm her hidden expertise or reveal explanations for the contradictions that had been accumulating for weeks. Chen's systematic observation began during the Monday morning equipment inspection, where he positioned himself to watch Rodriguez's work methods with the careful attention he should have applied from the beginning. What he observed was a woman whose apparent clumsiness masked analytical capabilities that Chen was only beginning to appreciate. Rodriguez's equipment inspection wasn't the routine inventory procedure Chen had assumed. She was conducting sophisticated technical assessments that required intimate knowledge of precision shooting equipment, operational requirements, and maintenance. Procedures that went far beyond basic familiarity with military hardware. When Rodriguez examined optical equipment that had been returned from field testing, her analysis revealed technical issues that had escaped notice during standard maintenance. Procedures. Chen watched as she identified calibration problems, component wear patterns, and performance degradation that required manufacturer attention or operational modifications. The parallax adjustment mechanism shows wear patterns that indicate improper mounting procedures, Rodriguez noted to the maintenance technician assisting with the inspection. The optical alignment has shifted enough to affect accuracy at distances beyond 800 meters, but the change is subtle enough that shooters might not recognize the degradation immediately. Her assessment demonstrated understanding of optical systems, mechanical tolerances, and practical shooting applications that Chen realized he couldn't have provided himself. Rodriguez's technical knowledge encompassed not just theoretical understanding, but practical experience with how equipment performed under various operational conditions. Chen spent the entire week observing Rodriguez's work with new attention to detail, documenting evidence of expertise that he'd previously missed or misinterpreted. The pattern that emerged was of someone whose technical capabilities were extraordinary, but whose public presentation was deliberately modest and understated. By Friday afternoon, Chen had accumulated enough evidence to convince him that Rodriguez possessed expertise that extended far beyond anything he'd initially understood. Her technical knowledge, professional activities, and recognition within military circles created a picture of someone whose capabilities he'd been completely wrong about from the beginning. The realization that he'd spent weeks publicly mocking someone whose expertise far exceeded his own was deeply humiliating for Chen. His confident commentary about personnel assessment had marked him as ignorant and judgmental, rather than perceptive and analytical. The reputation he'd built for reading people and situations accurately was revealed as based on fundamental misunderstanding. Saturday morning brought the event that would shatter Chen's remaining illusions about Rodriguez and force him to confront the magnitude of his misjudgment. An unscheduled helicopter arrival at Fort Cascade carried visitors, whose presence would reveal secrets that would change Chen's understanding of military service, personal competence, and the complex relationship between appearance and reality. The helicopter landed on the facility's main helipad with the kind of precision that suggested military rather than civilian operation. Chen watched from the barracks area as several individuals in military uniforms disembarked, their bearing and equipment suggesting they were personnel of significant importance rather than routine visitors. Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared at the barracks area within minutes of the helicopter's arrival, calling for immediate formation of all training personnel. "All hands to the main assembly area," Martinez announced. "Full dress uniform, immediate. Compliance." The urgency in Martinez's voice suggested that the visitor's presence was both unexpected and significant. Chen joined the formation with growing curiosity about the nature of the visit and the identity of the people who'd arrived by helicopter. The assembly area was quickly filled with personnel from all training programs, creating a gathering that included everyone assigned to Fort Cascade. Captain Wilson took position at the front of the formation, his expression serious and his bearing suggesting that whatever was about to happen was of considerable importance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wilson announced, "we have distinguished visitors who've requested to address our training programs. I expect your complete attention and professional deportment." The visitors entered the assembly area with the confident bearing of people accustomed to command authority. Chen recognized the insignia of senior officers whose ranks and positions suggested they held significant responsibility within military hierarchy. Their presence at Fort Cascade was clearly related to matters of considerable importance. The senior visitor, a woman wearing the eagles of a full colonel, stepped forward to address the assembled personnel. Her bearing and presence commanded immediate attention, and Chen found himself standing straighter as she prepared to speak. "Good morning," the colonel began, her voice carrying easily across the formation. "I'm Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Special Operations Command. I'm here today to discuss precision shooting operations and to recognize exceptional contributions to military effectiveness." Chen felt a moment of recognition at the name, remembering Major Coleman's reference to Colonel Mitchell during previous briefings. Colonel Mitchell's presentation began with discussion of recent precision shooting operations that had achieved strategic objectives through exceptional marksmanship under extreme conditions. Chen listened with professional interest, noting the complexity of the missions and the precision required for successful completion. "The operations I'm describing represent the current pinnacle of precision shooting achievement," Mitchell explained. "Environmental conditions, tactical constraints, and strategic requirements created challenges that required capabilities beyond normal training parameters." Chen absorbed this information eagerly, seeing it as insight into the kind of elite operations he hoped to be selected for. Mitchell's presentation continued with technical analysis of the factors that had made these operations possible. Environmental analysis, ballistic calculations, and equipment modifications had combined to enable precision shooting at distances and under conditions that exceeded normal operational parameters. The technical expertise required for these operations came from consultation with our foremost authority on extreme-range precision shooting, Mitchell announced. Chen listened with growing anticipation, expecting to learn about legendary figures whose expertise had enabled these remarkable achievements. "Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez," Mitchell continued, "whose technical contributions and practical expertise made these operations possible." Chen felt his world shift as Mitchell's words registered the casual pronunciation of Rodriguez's name, creating cognitive dissonance that left him struggling to process what he was hearing. Mitchell gestured toward the back of the formation, where Rodriguez was standing in her usual, unobtrusive position. Sergeant Rodriguez's analysis of atmospheric variables and ballistic calculations provided the technical foundation that enabled successful mission completion under conditions that would normally be considered impossible. Chen turned to look at Rodriguez, seeing her for what felt like the first time. She stood quietly in formation, apparently uncomfortable with the attention, but accepting Mitchell's recognition with professional dignity. Her bearing suggested someone accustomed to recognition, but not necessarily comfortable with public acknowledgement. The shot that eliminated the primary target in Operation Silver Arrow was taken at a distance of 1,847 meters under atmospheric conditions that included variable crosswinds, thermal gradients, and pressure variations that required real-time calculation adjustments, Mitchell continued. Chen felt the pieces of a puzzle falling into place as Mitchell's description revealed the scope of Rodriguez's actual achievements. Sergeant Rodriguez's technical analysis enabled a precision shot that ended a 3-year military operation and saved an estimated 2,000 lives that would have been lost in conventional military action. Mitchell's words hit Chen like physical blows as he realized the magnitude of what he was learning about the woman he'd spent weeks mocking. The formation remained silent as Mitchell continued her explanation of Rodriguez's contributions to military operations. The technical expertise, practical experience, and strategic impact of her work created a picture of someone whose capabilities Chen had been completely incapable of recognizing or understanding. The military designation for this operation was classified, but Sergeant Rodriguez's call sign during her operational career was Ghost, Mitchell revealed. Chen felt his knees weaken as Mitchell's words registered, the legendary call sign triggering memories of stories he'd heard about impossible shots and miraculous marksmanship achievements. Ghost was a name whispered in military circles, associated with precision shooting achievements that bordered on the mythical. Stories about Ghost's operations were told in hushed tones, legends about shots that had changed the course of military conflicts and achievements that exceeded anything documented in official records. Chen realized that he'd been making jokes about someone whose shooting achievements were legendary within military special operations. The woman he'd called Butterfingers was the person whose technical expertise and practical capabilities had made her a legend among the most elite military units. Mitchell's presentation continued with details about Rodriguez's contributions that systematically demolished every assumption Chen had made about her capabilities and significance. Her technical expertise had influenced equipment development, training programs, and operational planning at the highest levels of military command. Sergeant Rodriguez specifically requested assignment to Fort Cascade to contribute to training programs that prepare personnel for precision shooting operations, Mitchell explained. Her expertise in environmental analysis and ballistic calculations has improved program effectiveness and graduate performance in operational assignments. Chen understood that Rodriguez's assignment to Fort Cascade wasn't the result of bureaucratic incompetence or limited capabilities. She had chosen to work in training and equipment management because she wanted to contribute to preparing other personnel for the kind of operations where her expertise could save lives and achieve strategic objectives. The realization that Rodriguez had deliberately chosen what appeared to be a diminished assignment because she valued the work itself over recognition or advancement was perhaps the most humbling revelation for Chen, his assumption that capable people always sought prominent positions and public recognition was revealed as fundamentally naive about the motivations that drove truly exceptional individuals. As Mitchell concluded her presentation with formal recognition of Rodriguez's contributions, Chen felt the weight of his own ignorance and arrogance crushing down on him. Every joke he'd made, every dismissive comment he'd shared, every moment of condescension he'd displayed had revealed his own limitations rather than Rodriguez's. The woman he'd called Butterfingers was one of the most accomplished precision shooters in military history, someone whose expertise was valued at the highest levels of government and whose contributions had influenced military operations around the world. Chen had spent weeks publicly demonstrating his complete inability to recognize excellence when it was standing directly in front of him. The weight of Colonel Mitchell's revelation settled over Chen like a physical force, transforming every memory of his interactions with Rodriguez into evidence of his spectacular failure in judgment. The woman he'd mockingly called Butterfingers was Ghost, the legendary sniper whose impossible shots had become whispered legends throughout military circles. Chen stood frozen in formation, his face burning with shame as the full magnitude of his ignorance crashed down upon him. The formation was dismissed with instructions to resume normal duties, but Chen found himself unable to move as other personnel filed past him toward their various assignments. He watched Rodriguez walk away with the same understated bearing she'd always shown, her posture revealing nothing of the extraordinary achievements that had just been revealed to the entire base. Even now, in the aftermath of public recognition, she moved without fanfare or self-importance. Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared beside Chen, noting his obvious distress with the experienced eye of someone who'd seen many young soldiers confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. "Rough morning, Private?" Martinez asked quietly, his tone neither mocking nor sympathetic but simply observant. Chen struggled to find words that could express the humiliation and self-recrimination that were overwhelming him. "Sergeant, I've been making comments about Sergeant Rodriguez for weeks. Things that were completely wrong and disrespectful. I feel like the biggest fool who ever wore a uniform." His voice carried the genuine anguish of someone whose self-image had been shattered by reality. Martinez nodded thoughtfully, apparently unsurprised by Chen's confession. "Son, you're not the first soldier to learn that appearances can be deceiving, and you won't be the last. The question isn't whether you made mistakes. It's what you're going to do about them now that you know better." His guidance was direct, but not unkind, suggesting that redemption was possible through appropriate action. "What should I do?" Chen asked, genuinely seeking guidance about how to address his spectacular misjudgment. Martinez considered the question carefully before responding, his answer reflecting years of experience with young soldiers who needed to learn difficult lessons about military service and personal character. "Start by understanding that real competence doesn't always announce itself," Martinez replied. "Some of the most capable people you'll ever serve with are the ones who do their jobs without needing everyone to know how good they are. Learn to recognize excellence even when it doesn't fit your expectations about what it should look like." Chen absorbed Martinez's guidance while wrestling with the practical question of how to face Rodriguez after weeks of dismissive behavior. The thought of their next interaction filled him with anxiety, but he understood that avoiding her would only compound his mistakes. He needed to acknowledge his errors and attempt to make amends, regardless of how uncomfortable the process might be. The opportunity came sooner than Chen expected when he was assigned to assist with equipment inventory in the depot where Rodriguez worked. Chen approached the assignment with considerable nervousness, uncertain how Rodriguez might treat him after Colonel Mitchell's revelation had exposed the full extent of his ignorance and disrespect. Rodriguez was conducting her usual methodical inventory procedures when Chen reported for duty, her demeanor showing no indication that anything had changed since the morning's formation. She acknowledged his presence with professional courtesy and assigned him specific tasks without reference to the dramatic revelations about her background or his previous behavior. "Private Chen, I need you to verify the serial numbers on the optical equipment in Section 3. Rodriguez instructed, her voice carrying the same calm authority she'd always shown. "Cross-reference each item with the database and note any discrepancies in condition or performance specifications." Her assignment was routine and professional, treating Chen like any other soldier assigned to assist with depot operations. Chen worked in uncomfortable silence for nearly an hour, hyper-aware of Rodriguez's presence while struggling with how to address the elephant in the room. Finally, his need to acknowledge his mistakes overcame his anxiety about her possible response. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he began hesitantly, "I owe you an apology for my behavior since arriving at Fort Cascade." Rodriguez looked up from her documentation, her expression neutral but attentive. "Go on," she said simply, neither encouraging nor discouraging his attempt at amends. Chen took a deep breath and continued, knowing that this conversation would either begin the process of redemption or confirm his status as a complete failure of military bearing. "I made assumptions about your capabilities that were completely wrong," Chen continued, his words coming faster as he pushed through his embarrassment. "I said things that were disrespectful and ignorant, and I influenced other people to share my misconceptions. I realize now that I've been judging someone whose achievements I couldn't even comprehend." Rodriguez listened without interruption, her expression giving no indication of her thoughts about Chen's apology. When he finished speaking, she was quiet for a long moment, before responding with characteristic directness. "Apology noted, Private. The question is what you've learned from this experience, and how you plan to apply that knowledge going forward." Her response was neither harsh nor forgiving, but simply practical, focusing on future behavior rather than past mistakes. Chen appreciated her approach, which acknowledged his errors without dwelling on them in ways that would have made redemption more difficult. Rodriguez was providing him with an opportunity to move forward constructively. I've learned that I don't understand as much about evaluating people as I thought I did, Chen replied honestly. I want to become the kind of soldier who recognizes excellence regardless of how it's packaged and who contributes to mission success rather than just seeking personal recognition. Rodriguez nodded approvingly at his response. That's a good foundation for growth, she observed. Military service provides plenty of opportunities to develop better judgment and professional maturity. The key is remaining humble about what you don't know while working to become more perceptive about what really matters. Their conversation continued as they worked through the inventory procedures, with Rodriguez providing insights into military professionalism that went far beyond technical skills. Chen found himself taking mental notes about her approach to leadership, service, and the complex relationship between competence and recognition in military organizations. Real leadership often happens behind the scenes, Rodriguez observed as she demonstrated proper procedures for documenting equipment condition. The most important contributions to mission success frequently come from people who focus on doing the work well rather than making sure everyone notices their efforts. Chen absorbed Rodriguez's guidance eagerly, recognizing that she was providing education about military character that wasn't available through formal training programs. Her willingness to mentor him, despite his previous disrespect, demonstrated exactly the kind of professional grace that he was beginning to understand characterized genuine military excellence. The weeks following Chen's conversation with Rodriguez marked the beginning of a transformation that would influence the remainder of his military career. His approach to evaluating people and situations became more thoughtful and humble, reflecting his hard-learned understanding that appearances could be profoundly misleading. Chen's changed attitude was immediately apparent to his roommates and the circle of trainees, who'd previously looked to him for social leadership and personnel insights. His commentary about base staff became more respectful and considered, acknowledging that he might not understand the full scope of people's capabilities or contributions. I think I've been making some serious errors in how I assess people around here, Chen admitted to Morrison during an evening conversation. The whole situation with Sergeant Rodriguez taught me that I don't really understand as much about military service as I thought I did. His acknowledgement of ignorance was difficult, but necessary for beginning genuine learning. Morrison and the others responded to Chen's transformed perspective with interest and some confusion. His previous confident assessments had been influential in shaping their own opinions about base personnel, and his admission of error forced them to reconsider their own assumptions and judgments. What made you realize you were wrong about her? Kim asked, genuinely curious about the process that had led to such a dramatic change in Chen's perspective. Chen's response was carefully considered, reflecting his desire to share what he'd learned without violating operational security requirements about Rodriguez's background. I learned that competence doesn't always look like what you expect it to, Chen explained. People contribute to mission success in different ways, and those contributions aren't always obvious to casual observation. I was so focused on what I thought I was seeing that I missed what was actually happening. Chen's transformed approach became apparent during subsequent training exercises, where his focus shifted from demonstrating individual superiority to learning from every available source of knowledge and expertise. His interactions with instructors and support personnel became more respectful and attentive, reflecting his understanding that everyone had something valuable to contribute. The change was particularly noticeable in Chen's relationship with Rodriguez, whose guidance he now sought regularly for both technical instruction and professional development. Their mentor-student relationship evolved into something that provided Chen with insights into military service that went far beyond precision shooting techniques. Rodriguez's mentorship was characteristically low-key but profoundly influential. She shared her understanding of military professionalism through example and occasional direct guidance, helping Chen develop the intellectual humility and professional maturity that would serve him throughout his career. Excellence in military service comes from focusing on mission accomplishment rather than personal advancement, Rodriguez observed during one of their training sessions. When you concentrate on doing the work well and supporting the people around you, recognition and advancement usually follow naturally. Chen found Rodriguez's philosophy both challenging and liberating. Her emphasis on service over self-promotion represented a fundamental shift from his previous approach to military career development, but it also aligned with his growing understanding of what military professionalism actually required. The practical application of Chen's changed perspective came during a complex training exercise that required effective teamwork and coordination between personnel with different specialties and backgrounds. Instead of positioning himself as the natural leader, Chen focused on understanding how his capabilities could best support collective mission success. The exercise involved multiple precision shooting teams, coordinating their efforts to engage targets under simulated combat conditions. Chen's role required both individual technical excellence and effective collaboration with team members whose approaches and methods differed from his own. Chen's performance during the exercise reflected his transformed understanding of military service. He contributed his shooting skills while actively seeking input from teammates, whose experience and expertise complemented his own capabilities. His focus on team success rather than individual recognition improved overall performance and demonstrated his developing professional maturity. Rodriguez observed the exercise as part of her training support responsibilities and provided feedback that acknowledged Chen's improved approach to teamwork and leadership. Her observations were encouraging while offering specific guidance for continued development. Your willingness to listen to others and focus on collective objectives showed real growth, Rodriguez noted. Military effectiveness depends on people who can contribute their individual strengths while supporting shared mission accomplishment. You're developing the kind of professional approach that creates lasting positive impact. Chen treasured Rodriguez's feedback, understanding that her approval represented recognition from someone whose standards and achievements exceeded anything he'd previously encountered. Her continued willingness to mentor him despite his earlier mistakes demonstrated the kind of leadership grace that he hoped to develop himself. As his training at Fort Cascade neared completion, Chen reflected on the profound transformation he'd undergone since arriving as an overconfident recruit convinced of his own perceptual superiority. The lessons he'd learned about intellectual humility and respect for others would influence every aspect of his future military service. Chen's graduation from the Advanced Precision Shooting Program represented more than technical achievement. It marked his development into a soldier who understood that character was as important as skill for sustained military effectiveness. The diploma he received was less significant than the wisdom he'd gained about service, leadership, and the complex relationship between competence and recognition. The graduation ceremony included individual recognition for outstanding performance and assignment notifications for next duty stations. Chen learned that he'd been selected for assignment to an elite reconnaissance unit that conducted precision shooting operations in support of Special Forces missions, exactly the kind of position he'd hoped to achieve. However, Chen's excitement about his assignment was tempered by understanding that success would depend on applying the character lessons he'd learned rather than simply relying on technical skills. His experience with Rodriguez had taught him that true military excellence required sustained commitment to something larger than personal advancement. Rodriguez attended the graduation ceremony in her usual capacity as equipment coordinator, maintaining her characteristic low profile despite the extraordinary background that had been revealed weeks earlier. Chen appreciated her consistency in focusing on mission support rather than seeking acknowledgement for her achievements. During the reception following the ceremony, Chen approached Rodriguez for what would likely be their final conversation. Before his departure, he wanted to express his gratitude for her mentorship and acknowledge how profoundly she'd influenced his understanding of military service and personal character. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Chen began, "I want to thank you for the patience and guidance you've shown me during my time here. You've taught me lessons about military professionalism that I couldn't have learned anywhere else, and you've helped me understand what service really means." Rodriguez accepted his gratitude with characteristic modesty, deflecting personal credit while encouraging his continued development. "You did the hard work of changing your approach and learning from your mistakes," she replied. "Take what you've learned and use it to help others become better soldiers. That's how knowledge and experience get passed forward." Chen understood that Rodriguez's final guidance embodied the principles she'd been teaching throughout his transformation. Military service was about contributing to purposes larger than individual success, and leadership meant helping others develop capabilities that would serve mission accomplishment and their fellow soldiers. 2 years after graduating from Fort Cascade, Sergeant Chen found himself assigned to Forward Operating Base Phoenix, where his unit conducted precision shooting operations in support of critical military missions. His assignment required exactly the kind of technical expertise and professional character he'd developed during his training, and Chen discovered that his experience with Rodriguez had prepared him well for operational challenges. The most significant test of Chen's transformation came when his unit received a new team member, Corporal David Martinez, whose assignment seemed inconsistent with his background in vehicle maintenance and logistics support. Martinez appeared uncertain about precision shooting equipment and struggled with ballistic calculations that other team members handled routinely. Chen's initial reaction was to question Martinez's qualifications for assignment to an elite precision shooting unit, but his experience with Rodriguez had taught him to observe carefully and withhold judgment until he understood the full scope of someone's capabilities. Instead of expressing doubts, Chen offered assistance and sought to understand Martinez's actual strengths. "Corporal Martinez," Chen approached him during a break in training, "would you like some help with the environmental analysis procedures? I found them challenging when I first started working with this equipment." His offer was genuine and respectful, reflecting his understanding that competence developed differently for different people. Martinez accepted Chen's assistance gratefully, and their subsequent work sessions revealed that his struggles with shooting techniques masked sophisticated understanding of tactical logistics and operational planning that significantly enhanced team effectiveness. His background in vehicle operations provided insights into mobility and supply considerations that improved mission planning and execution. Chen observed Martinez's contributions with growing appreciation for the diverse expertise that effective military units required. Martinez's apparent limitations in precision shooting were secondary to his specialized knowledge that enabled mission success in ways that weren't immediately obvious, but were essential for operational effectiveness. The validation of Chen's approach came during a complex mission that required coordinated precision shooting with advanced logistics support and tactical mobility. Martinez's expertise in vehicle operations and supply management enabled real-time adaptation to changing conditions that was critical for mission success. Chen's role in the mission required both individual shooting excellence and effective teamwork with Martinez and other specialists whose capabilities complemented his own skills. The mission's success demonstrated how diverse expertise combined to achieve objectives that exceeded what any individual could accomplish alone. Following the mission, Chen wrote to Rodriguez, updating her on his assignment and sharing how the lessons he'd learned continued to influence his military service. He described his work with Martinez and how his experience at Fort Cascade had prepared him to recognize capabilities that weren't immediately apparent. "The most important thing you taught me was that excellence comes in many forms, and that the most significant contributions often come from people who work without seeking recognition," Chen wrote. "That lesson has influenced every aspect of my military service and has made me a more effective soldier and leader." Rodriguez's reply was characteristically modest but encouraging, expressing satisfaction with Chen's continued development and his application of lessons learned at Fort Cascade. Her response included guidance for his ongoing growth and reminders about the principles that should guide effective military service. Military service provides continuous opportunities for learning and growth, Rodriguez wrote. The most successful soldiers are those who remain humble about their limitations while contributing their capabilities to collective mission success. Continue focusing on helping others around you become better soldiers, and your own development will follow naturally. Chen treasured Rodriguez's continued guidance and made her letter a regular reference point for decisions about professional development and interactions with fellow soldiers. Her influence continued shaping his approach to military service long after their direct relationship had ended. Years later, Master Sergeant Chen found himself in positions where he could pass forward the lessons he'd learned about intellectual humility, respect for others, and focus on collective mission success. His approach to mentoring younger soldiers reflected Rodriguez's influence while incorporating insights gained through his own military experience and leadership development. When Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh joined Chen's unit with a background that seemed inconsistent with precision shooting requirements, Chen recognized an opportunity to apply the principles Rodriguez had taught him. Walsh was talented, but displayed the same kind of overconfidence that Chen remembered from his own early military service. "The support personnel here seem pretty basic," Walsh observed during her first week. "I'm surprised how much attention everyone pays to people who are obviously just filling routine positions." Her comment reminded Chen of his own initial dismissiveness toward people whose contributions he hadn't understood. Chen's response was informed by his experience with Rodriguez and his understanding of how diverse capabilities contributed to military effectiveness. "Military operations depend on expertise that isn't always obvious," Chen explained patiently. "The people who seem to be filling routine positions often have knowledge and experience that are critical for mission success." Chen's guidance, too. Walsh reflected the principles Rodriguez had taught him about recognizing excellence regardless of how it was packaged. He helped Walsh understand that military effectiveness required appreciating different forms of competence and that leadership meant supporting collective success rather than individual recognition. The mentorship relationship with Walsh provided Chen with deeper appreciation for Rodriguez's patience and professionalism during his own development. Teaching Walsh required the same kind of sustained commitment to another person's growth that Rodriguez had demonstrated, helping Chen understand the character required for effective military leadership. Walsh's development under Chen's guidance validated the principles Rodriguez had taught about leadership through example and patient instruction. By focusing on Walsh's growth rather than his own recognition, Chen achieved the kind of positive influence that created lasting improvement in military effectiveness and professional development. Throughout his military career, Chen continued to encounter situations that tested his ability to recognize capabilities that weren't immediately apparent, and to contribute to collective mission success rather than seeking individual advancement. Each challenge provided opportunities to apply the lessons Rodriguez had taught about intellectual humility and professional character. The ultimate validation of Rodriguez's influence came when Chen was selected for senior leadership positions, based not just on technical competence, but on demonstrated ability to develop others and contribute to unit effectiveness. His leadership style reflected the principles he'd learned at Fort Cascade about focusing on mission accomplishment and supporting the growth of subordinates. Chen's success in leadership roles demonstrated the lasting value of the lessons Rodriguez had taught about military professionalism and character development. Her influence extended far beyond their direct relationship to shape an entire career dedicated to the principles of service, humility, and collective mission success. Decades after his transformation at Fort Cascade, Chen understood that the Most important shot Rodriguez had ever made wasn't the legendary precision shot that ended a war, but the patient, careful work of developing character and competence in soldiers who would carry those lessons throughout their own careers. Her true legacy lived not in military records, but in the countless individuals whose lives and service had been shaped by her example of dedicated professionalism. Chen's own career became part of that legacy, demonstrating how one person's commitment to developing others could create positive influence that extended far beyond individual achievements to shape entire institutions and their missions. The woman called Butterfingers had indeed changed the course of history, not just through extraordinary marksmanship, but through the systematic development of military character that would serve effectiveness and professionalism for generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.